change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrans.
All right, everyone, we're here for another episode of the Fundraising AI podcast. And this is a podcast, I think I say this a lot, is that it's a special podcast that we're really looking forward to. And I think it's because Scott and I, we set these up so far in advance that we truly are really looking forward to spending some time with some amazing people. And today we have truly an awesome guest that I think is going to blow your mind and just give you different things and a different orientation to think about as we're talking about advances in AI and all things nerdy. So we've never done this on a podcast before. I've never read a bio, but this individual sent just a short bio that I felt like when I read it, I'm like, we have to read this. Don't you agree, Scott?
I agree.
It's pretty impressive.
It's pretty good.
Okay. So just real quick for context, Lily Loughridge, which I just learned is a Scottish last name. We met, I think it was earlier this year at the Gen AI conference in Las Vegas, Imagine AI. And I think I was like one of the closing presentations where it was like the wet blanket of the whole conference, which is like, everyone is like, look at all the things AI can do. And then my presentation was a bit more like ho-hum of like, well, let's not screw up the planet and humanity at the same time.
No, that's not true. That's not true, Nathan. Your presentation caught my ear because I actually made a note about how eloquent you were talking about AI governance and how companies aren't thinking enough about this, when a number of companies had just presented on AI with, in fact, no governance policies, right? To your point. You brought the conference home, for sure.
You were the one person, so I appreciate that felt that way. But I take it as a badge of honor to kind of at least remind people that some of the times we work in technology that there are consequences and sometimes unintended consequences. So this is a bio, and I'll go through this. Lily Loughridge is a rising senior at Stanford University studying computer science and psychology. By the way, Scott has a master's in psychology and love that part of your degree with a focus on learning. Encompassing both human cognition and machine learning. Passionate about education, she founded a tutoring charity in high school and a tutoring business during her gap year. At Stanford, Lily noticed a discrepancy in funding for female founders and responded by establishing Stanford Women in Technology Entrepreneurship, a vibrant community of women building apps and startups. This summer, she's interning with Liberty Global's Technology Ventures arm, concentrating on AI business and addressing rising energy demands. And lastly, Lily has received several awards from her sorority, including, I love this, Most Generous Member 2023 and Most Positive Member, not surprised, in 2024. She's also an X-Fund Ethics Fellow, a Big Sister, and holds a real estate license. This is her first podcast, but it'll be the first of thousands of podcasts in her career, I guarantee you, because she's a special individual. We've had a few conversations since Las Vegas, and I'm just so impressed. And honestly, I think the way you kind of carry yourself, Lily, and truly underachiever in the sense of just let other people tackle big problems. You are someone that actually gets stuff done. And it's amazing to have you on here and to be able to spend a little bit of time with you today.
Thank you, Nathan. And thank you, Scott, so much for having me. So excited for this. To add a little bit of color to what Nathan just mentioned about our meetings after the conference, he was helping me strategize how to start fundraising for my club. But we hopped on a call with this goal to kind of make a plan and ended up nerding out about AI for the whole hour that we had to schedule another call. And then the same thing happened. This has happened a number of times. And here I am. So now we can actually focus on AI and what we care about.
It's awesome. This is the time to get super nerdy. This podcast is really for people mainly in the nonprofit sector that are thinking about AI for good. I'm on brand today with my hat from the AI for Good Foundation in Geneva. Scott and I got back from a little bit ago. And at the end of the day, I think most of the people that either we've had as guests, I think all of the people that we've had as guests, and times when we don't have guests, we're usually talking to individuals that are maybe midway through their career and they're dealing with a lot of anxiety or trepidation about AI and when and how to adopt. And in fact, yesterday when I was presenting in Colorado, by show of hands, how many are using AI? It was probably around 20%. But I had several people come up to me after And actually during Q&A, people grabbed microphone and said, I'd been holding out. I was the Luddite in the group. I'm holding out. I've not used it, but you convinced me to use it. So I think it's very different when I talk to college students in the sense of like, there's this tool and it's amazing. Why would I not use it? And so having you as a guest today, just to talk about that is just going to be, it's great because I think there's a lot to learn from both sides, right? I mean, there's a lot to learn from each other and these different kind of orientations. So why don't we just start with, and again, this is just conversational. I'm super interested, just getting to the heart of the matter. Like you're a rising senior. So that means you're graduating within 12 months, I guess, or next May or sometime soon.
Yep, next June.
Awesome. Congratulations. That's got to feel really good. And the final part goes super fast, just to be like over like a blink. What's it like studying computer science? And I'm sure Scott will talk about psychology in a little bit, in a time where we're facing a technology explosion that we've never experienced before. I mean, the birth of the internet was a big deal, and I was a part of that when we created .com in '97. But this is different. Like, what's it like to be a senior? So, like, looking at future careers and future jobs, in a time where like nothing is the same. Is that exciting? Is it scary? Is it everywhere in between?
Great question. It feels good. It feels really good because I'm glad I'm in school while all this is being rolled out and can learn about it and decide now how it's going to inform my future career path. ChatGPT came out when I was a sophomore in college, and it was really interesting to watch Stanford's response to AI. Now, obviously, Stanford was behind a lot of the technological advancements. Stanford are affiliated, and as an institution, they invest heavily in AI, like literally, but then also culturally, in that they're supporting all these thought leaders, bringing them to campus, hosting events and conferences. Where that diverges is how they've been addressing it in the classroom. Mm-hmm. There's not one clear AI policy because it's still so new. And the first concern when it did come out 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, my sophomore year, unsurprisingly, was that students would cheat. And of course they were. So Stanford, for a period of time, said, well, we're going to come out with an AI catcher, a model that will read through your essays and your submitted code and catch anyone who has used AI to support their work. And that's, of course, entirely possible because the way that these large language models work is that they produce the word that has the highest probability of being consequent to the preceding words. And so if you have that probability information, then you can just cross-check it and see if it makes sense. Now, there is on models called temperature that basically allows you to diverge from that top probability, like how comfortable you are diverging from it. And so students quickly figured out that they could adjust the temperature and they'd get more variety and throw off the AI checker. And in my opinion, if you're smart enough to go into the back of the model, adjust the temperature, and figure this all out, you should be using that anyways.
Yeah, that should be incredible.
Absolutely. And unsurprisingly, there's been kind of different approaches from different too. Predictably, the humanities have been more hesitant, more in opposition, but the computer science department is actually very supportive of using AI, studying AI, and also using it in your work. Some classes offer up to $200 of stipends to purchase ChatGPT plugins or APIs and play around with it. So they're really supporting it. But I can share what some of my friends are up to that I think really speaks to the adoption and embracing of AI among people my age. I have a friend working at an autonomous car company on the AI safety team, working to generate synthetic safety circumstances or circumstances where safety is at stake to then test her company's car's response to it and determine whether or not it's safe. That is incredibly important. Like, she was working on a critical project. I have a friend building an AI skincare startup. I have friends at Google and Microsoft. But my favorite story is of one of my friends who works in a biology lab. And as an undergraduate researcher in a biology lab, he's been assigned a pretty menial task of data labeling. The lab's actually interesting. It's a behavioral cognition, a behavioral psychology lab, and it works with monkeys. So he labels videos, hours of video data oh, the monkey made eye contact with the other monkey, or they averted their gaze, or they moved away. Well, he's excited about the project, but he's not excited about spending hours on this tedious task. So he built an image recognition automatic labeler model, and he walks around campus and he gets stopped by his lab mates who say, hey, why aren't you in lab? And he goes, I'm working, and points to his computer in his backpack, which is
Awesome.
running the data labeling 300 times as fast as he would. And he's just hanging out. It's awesome.
That's
is
so
awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool. We've talked to a number of people from different schools, right? Again, being on the nonprofit fundraising side. One school that I was doing kind of like an all staff meeting with, they purchased the enterprise license for anybody that has an email address with that school. So students, employees, faculty, whatever it is. So everybody has generative AI. That doesn't seem like that's where Stanford is right now, right? But you have a foot in two different camps, computer science and psychology. And you're saying that they're treating it differently. So you have to kind of like put on one hat of like, oh, Gen AI is endorsed, supported, and encouraged here. But then over here, I have to kind of go the traditional methods of pen and paper or computer. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that debate exists in my own head, like these two, looking at it through these two lenses, because in regard to psychology, I see the existential threat it has on human cognition. I think, Nathan, I've given you this example before, but if a fifth grader starts generating their essays instead of writing them, it's not just the writing that's at stake. It's their thought process, their ability to think through ideas, their ability to slow down and articulate themselves, organize their thoughts, think about how evidence fits into larger arguments, think about how to be persuasive. And that's going to trickle down into their ability to communicate with other people via essay, via paper, via text, certainly via language at all. So I understand the hesitancy from the psychology department, but I also am so enthusiastic from the computer science side. So you're absolutely right. I see that duality.
Yeah, it's so interesting on the psychology aspect of it. When we're talking about, in our case, a lot of times donor psychology and consumer motivation and things like that, which are all fairly intertwined in how people accept information and what they do with that, is AI's ability to outperform humans in convincing people to do things that they don't want to do. And that applies to things like overcoming grief or quitting smoking or buying a pair of shoes. And I think it was Ethan Mollick's quotes, something like, AI outperformed a human in convincing something to do something 87% better than a human. I totally butchered this, but the premise of it stands in that if you have something that's read every book on psychology ever written, every case study, every research project, and it can recall that together all at one time, it's pretty amazing what it can do. What was the reason for the kind of dual major, and that not just a dual major, but that specific dual major? Was there intention behind it in terms of computer science and psychology and how they blend together, and because of your personal interest, or was it just that you're bored and you wanted to make life harder for yourself?
Yeah, right. Good question. So it's actually a combo program that incorporates the elements of computer science and psychology. It's not a dual major. It's a major that incorporates both. It's called Symbolic Systems, but no one outside of Stanford knows what that is. So that's how it's described. It's externally.
Funny. We're very familiar with Symbolic Systems. A good friend of ours, James Knopf, shout out to #FarmLink Project, was a Symbolic Systems major. Great. And then our former data scientist, Andrew Olson, was master's in Symbolic Systems as well. And so it is a very interesting degree. And actually it solves for a lot of those issues where the debate around colleges that are creating specific straight AI kind of colleges or computational data science colleges is that they're not rounded out. They don't have psychology. They don't have a lot of the other types of classes. They become so isolated that you graduate kind of one-dimensionally. And the thing I've always liked about Stanford's approach in Symbolic Systems, it's a more holistic view of why and how and looking at consequences of technology throughout humanity. So that's awesome.
And it incorporates elements of philosophy too.
Right.
And Nathan, to your point about AI being able to perform tasks better than others, that really resonates because of my interest in education, the ownership of this tutoring business, and I absolutely love working with students. And I do have an ambition to be a teacher later in my life. But there's speculation about whether or not AI can teach better than people.
Right.
I'm in the camp that there is an intangible human essence to teaching that cannot be replaced. But not everyone agrees with that, such that laws are being rolled out to protect human teachers. The California State Assembly recently passed a bill that requires all community college professors to, in fact, be human. And it was actually a result of a number of school administrators talking about an opportunity to cut costs by replacing teachers and teaching assistants with AI. And I think what it really does indicate is that policymakers are going to be the ones to decide which jobs are replaced and which aren't. And the policymakers are going to feel pressure from industry groups. And I believe that is going to be what builds out how this goes, which jobs are replaced and which aren't. But certainly, I think really does require a human element.
So similar again to nonprofits, I mean, they're all resource constrained, right? And they're trying to figure out, can we replace humans in this job with AI bots? Right? We've talked about this a number of times on previous podcasts and at different conferences. So you're seeing this from your end, and you wear many hats, right? So you do this Symbolic systems, you started this organization, the Stanford Women in Technology Entrepreneurship, you have your real estate license, like tutoring, everything, right? So from your perspective, how do you find the balance of we can, but should we, right? That answering that question of just because you can, does that, do I, right?
Mm-hmm. And you mean specifically in regard to replacing people with AI, like replacing tutors with AI or replacing fundraising experts with AI?
Yeah, like where would you guide others to kind of come to that decision of when should we keep humans in the loop? When should we just kind of cut costs and go the other route?
Candidate. It's a great story. So this candidate's name was AI Steve. And it was a candidate who didn't lie, who didn't sleep, who always had data-backed answers. This candidate was accessible to its constituents, could speak to up to 10,000 constituents at once via the webpage it was hosted on. And in that sense, it checked a lot of boxes for a desirable politician. Now, there is more to the story. AI Steve was represented by Steve Endicott, who's a UK technologist and entrepreneur. And although he claims it wasn't for publicity reasons, it was his company that created this bot. I do think it raises a number of really interesting questions about democracy and replacing different roles with AI. Because on one hand, it's awesome that this candidate, never lied, never slept. And the way it worked was that it would constantly be interacting with the constituents, gather real-time data about them, and then base its policies on the majority of beliefs that they found within their polled constituents. So does a good politician do exactly what the constituents want to the majority? Is a good politician always accessible to them and listening to them, if you will? Or is a politician's role and a leader's role to bring their unique human experience to the table and bring empathy to the table and make decisions based on that? I think my takeaway from this is that AI can be a tool to many people. Perhaps politicians should all have these AI bots such that their policies can be understandable to people who don't speak English or at different reading levels, and such that these people can also have a say in real time about what their needs are back to their politician. But no, there are some roles that absolutely still should be taken by a human.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you frame it that way, because we're dealing with this a lot more and sooner than we thought we would, because we've been saying for a long time that AI won't replace, say, fundraisers, but fundraisers that use AI will replace those that don't. You could say the same thing for politicians, that AI won't replace politicians, but those that use it will advance faster. But to your point, and this is what Scott's sharing, is like, just because we can doesn't mean we should. I think Mustafa Solomon in his book, The Coming Wave last year, I don't know, it's probably required reading in some degrees, it should be, but he talks about this being the most productive decade in the history of the human species. And we're now faced with the question of how and when to say no. because the financial incentives are strong, right? To all those things, like a politician that doesn't sleep, that can't lie, that is totally accessible in every language. Like there are very strong advantages in cases to be made that this is the superhuman type of approach, but there are also severe consequences to societies at large, right? Because we are societies built by humans for humans. And all of a sudden you get into questions, and we saw just CrowdStrike is just a great example because it's top of mind, is that this fairly innocuous but not software application that is spread all over the world can have tremendous consequences in a moment's notice. So AI politicians that are creating platforms for change based on information, that information we know can be biased. And it's when we even talk about ethics, it's not about ethics being a minimum standard. It's just that ethics according to who? Is it based on a majority? Or is it based on other human values? And so we're dealing with a lot more esoteric questions on consciousness and things that I thought we would right now. I thought we would be dealing with these questions. If you had asked me a year or two ago, I'd be like, well, 2025, 26, we'll probably be having more of these more philosophical questions. But I think advances in obviously in augmented voice and video have just propelled this type of technology. So as we stay on that thread and that kind of preamble of like AI augmenting and or replacing, you're getting a degree in symbolic systems. Your intention is probably to go out in the world and use technology to some degree and knowing that you want to use it for good. Is it scary as a college student thinking like, it's like, well, if I just spent a couple of years learning how to code Python to realize that AI is really good at coding Python, or is it just like complete greenfield? Like what jobs do you think will be safe and that you're going to lean into, and which jobs maybe had you been considering previously in the last few years, you're like, oh, maybe not the best path?
That's a great question and certainly been top of mind. I think many jobs can and will be replaced. I'm not planning to go into software engineering, so I can't speak super well on this, but I think there are a number of jobs that require technical expertise in coding that are now being completely doable by AI. One small example is web creation. Not so long ago, computer science students my age, their side hustles were making websites for their local restaurants and businesses. And that's not necessary anymore because there's a number of tools that literally convert your natural language right into a beautiful web page. Soft skills too, PowerPoint generation and research report generation. I've been using tools that support this for my current VC job. Even interviewing, by the way, a number of my friends and I have experienced AI-led interviews with companies called HireViews, where you actually just exchange with a bot instead of a real person. And I really don't know about that because on one hand, the company's signaling that they're technologically advanced, but on the other hand, it's almost like they're so budget constrained, or so cost efficient and don't even care if potential new team members are interacting with real people. So I think a number of jobs will be replaced. But again, I really think it's in the hands of the policymakers to determine which jobs will be protected and which will, just be untapped by AI.
On the flip side, are there jobs that you think will be coming out as a result in either computer science or psychology?
That's a good question. I think the older generations are eager to have ambassadors of AI. So I thought about starting a little AI consultancy business for a while in that similar way that I launched my tutoring business, just kind of have a few high touch clients because I really like people and like to work with people. And on that vein, I think that we'll have this resurgence of like oral skills and oral assessment, especially in schools where we can no longer tell if you've written this essay or if you've generated it. The only way a teacher will be able to determine whether or not you've actually grappled with the idea is if you can talk about it. And so we'll just see education trend back towards oral assessment, which in my opinion kills two birds with one stone because our generations are increasingly less social and awkward. So it'll be great to kind of see like more communication and relationship based and PR roles, I think.
Yeah. So as we continue pulling this thread on the future of work and the understanding that as we navigate through our AI transformations, just as societies and as individuals and as organizations, we know very well that responsible AI is an area. I mean, this is the thing that probably wakes Scott and I up in the morning, but also probably keeps us up at night, which is just this mass adoption without a lot of thought around the consequences or unintended consequences. I'll preface this with my son graduated with a master's in computational data science and math, and he didn't take a single class in AI ethics or in data ethics, even through his undergrad or his master's. And shout out to Chapman University that needs to get their crap together on that. And it wasn't like 5 years ago, it was like just a couple of years ago. Is that changed? I mean, are you in Symbolic systems at least, or do you see this even more broadly at Stanford? Is there more of a understanding of the need to educate students on, look, things that we're doing go beyond just you, and they have consequences, and therefore we need to look at short-term and long-term application of those? Or is that, I'm hoping for a little encouragement here that that's something that is being done at scale right now.
I have good news for you.
Good.
That is such a critical question. And I can attest that Stanford really does try. In almost every computer science assignment, all up and down the class levels, there's at least a small ethics write-up.
Awesome.
For example,
Right.
in this unit, we learned about sample bias. With the data set that we used for this problem, what could potential harms of the sample bias be? So they're really trying. They also have a number of ethics-specific classes, which I hope they grow because they're a favorite among students. But certainly there's been a lot of movement to having the engineers and the large language model users and students broadly, particularly these technical students in computer science classes, think about the implications of what they're working on.
That's amazing. Good job, Stanford.
Yeah. Well done. You can follow their lead, Chapman. I love picking people's brains and figuring out, like, what are the tools that you go to? Like Nathan and I mean, we talk about this all the time, right? We usually ask people like your standard, but in all the different hats you're wearing, what are your favorite tools? What are your favorite use cases of AI?
Yeah, I love that question. So Nathan turned me on to Firefly's AI, which I've adopted and I like. Superhuman AI is helpful for email sending. Gamma AI is a new tool that I was introduced to during my VC job because a co-investor had just invested in this company, and they're incredible. Wow, they make beautiful presentations. They organize your notes. They really capture the points you're trying to make. And then, of course, I use ChatGPT. I use it in my job currently for market reports and write-ups. Now, I do source all of the sources myself for a number of reasons. Number one, I want to make sure that what I'm looking at makes sense. I want it to pass through my mind so that I'm kind of learning as I'm doing it and can talk about it later on. And the second reason is because some of the data I'm working with is under lockdown. For example, ChatGPT can't just go troll PitchBook because you need to have a $7,000 PitchBook membership to be able to troll PitchBook. So I'll kind of make notes and start building a narrative, but then I'll rely on ChatGPT for organization and punctuation and grammar and kind of putting it all together. And then sometimes interact with it to get new ideas for ways to take the presentation or write-up. So Reid Hoffman is the founder of LinkedIn, and he's another Symbolic Systems graduate. I heard him speak recently, and he threw a term out that I really liked, and it's called iterative cognition. It's something that we do with each other. We throw ideas at each other and listen and react and kind of build up a bigger idea together. And we learn through iteration back and forth between another person. But the same can happen with an AI model. And so it's not that AI is replacing the creative elements or the brute work elements like of creating these market reports, but you kind of work with them, work with the tool iteratively to come into your final product.
Yeah, I love that. In fact, I don't know if you both saw this, but Reid Hoffman just did an AI debate with Ali Miller a couple weeks ago, and they've done some really fun like experiments together where they just sit down. If people, we could put a link in the show notes, but people should follow Reid Hoffman and just some of his pushing the boundaries kind of stuff on this. But I love that iterative cognition because this is the thing with AI. We say often, it's like with AI, you're never ready, but you're also never done. And this is AI transformation is a journey, not a destination. It's just a new way of thinking. And those that I think are really successful have an AI mindset that really thinks about it in terms of augmentation, not replacement. Because if you think about it in replacement, you shut it down and you try to keep it in a box. But if you think about it augmenting, specifically the things you don't like to do, we know that in every use case that we've seen on this, people end up doing their work better, higher quality of work. They end up doing it faster, and they also have less burnout. And so they have a higher degree of satisfaction when done. So tell us a little bit about your internship. So Liberty Global Tech Ventures in the Bay Area. Yeah. So what are you doing?
Great question. I worked for a really small startup last summer. And it was so crazy. They employed 3 times as many interns as full-time employees.
Smart.
It was literally an intern mill. It is smart. It was a great business model. It was cheap, smart labor. And they had smart kids too. Stanford, MIT, NYU, GW, whole cohort of us sitting at a table doing whatever the bosses told us.
Nice.
Insane. And so that was interesting and chaotic. And I realized that I didn't want to zero in on a specific problem space yet. So the thesis was, if I worked in VC, I could data train across a number of business models and problem spaces and founding teams and kind of see what piqued my interest. It's certainly been that. Talked to a number of really interesting founders, dove into a number of different spaces, and learned a lot of random tidbits from cognitive caching to DLP to what procurement is and how we can use AI for that. I will say that I have been now applying a financial lens to kind of the AI market as well. And AI is overvalued like crazy. Like, we cannot have 500 AI unicorns. That just doesn't make financial sense.
Yeah.
The market, it's infeasible to support that. So I think we're going to have a bit of a consolidation for the tools that really do matter. And only the best products will beat out in that. I also think that we're facing a few bottlenecks for this AI hype. One worth mentioning is the data bottleneck. We've already trained on the entirety of the internet, which means only a few different types of data remain that could add marginal value to our models. First of all, we can't generate a second internet and retrain on that, because that second internet will either have the same information about the current world or have different information, which would probably be inaccurate and not represent the current world. So what remains is user-generated data. This is an interesting segment. This is like the Reddit posts, the Instagram content. A second option is industry-specific data, although this faces some privacy concerns, legal data, healthcare data. And then lastly, synthetic data, like the internet that I mentioned, but obviously that example won't work, or the synthetic crash data that my friend at that autonomous car company is working on. So I do think we're going to see a little bit of a slowdown in terms of models, but that's just my hypothesis. Of course, there's always more to be speculated about that. The second bottleneck I really do see is the power bottleneck, because each model takes more compute power, which in turn requires more wattage, more electricity. And although we're seeing developments in efficiency for compute power per watt, flop per watt, right? Flop is for compute power, floating point operation is something, and it's like the amount of power needed to make the 2 + 2 calculation. So although we're seeing efficiencies in that, it's going to be a huge restraint for the development of the industry, is where we can actually get this power.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because we created a framework for responsible AI, and we put in, which is very different than like at AWS and Microsoft and Google. One of our 10 tenets of responsible AI is sustainability from an environmental perspective. And people thought we were kind of crazy. And we're like, well, we're the nonprofit sector. We owe it to the planet. Like, we are here to preserve humanity, not just for this generation, but future. And people really question us on that. And I'm really glad we did, because we're seeing this, like every query in a GPT is like turning a light bulb on and leaving it on for about a year. And so, I mean, this is why also Sam Altman and Bill Gates is focused on different forms of clean nuclear energy to fusion energy, which Microsoft purchased the first fusion plant that will go online. But there's this gap, and the data piece, I would absolutely agree with. There's a lot of tests showing that synthetic data can actually add value, but how much value at that point? So otherwise, new models are going to just be proportionally trained on TikTok videos, which I don't think anyone looks forward to, probably.
Oh my God.
Maybe some people do. I don't look forward to the future of models representing what TikTok looks like. So yeah, no, those are really great observations. We should have had you on our AI 101 podcast, because those are just like so well said.
Yeah, and some of those things we're already seeing, like the you can't have 500 AI unicorns. I mean, at the lower level, every time OpenAI rolls out a new release, they just gobble up 100 different ChatGPT wrappers, right? So those businesses that were doing incredibly well were gone in just a matter of minutes.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see just how they continue, because again, it's only been a year and a half old. Before we wrap up, I know we're getting pretty close to time. I'd love to just hear about the Stanford Women in Tech Entrepreneurship. Like, what are some of the success stories you see coming out of that, and where do you see that going as it continues?
And why did you create it? I think it's such an interesting area of focus for you.
It is certainly my pride and joy, and the pride and joy of all my friends who are on the founding team. So I totally caught the entrepreneurship bug as soon as I arrived at Stanford, and was thrilled to find a number of other women who were also interested in entrepreneurship. And we were very disheartened to learn that only 2% of VC dollars go to female founders. Actually, I think it's 2.6 as of 2023, but that's just terrible. That's disparaging. Yeah. And so we founded Stanford Women in Tech Entrepreneurship in response to that, to create a space for and network of and opportunities for young women interested in entrepreneurship. Now, the other component here is I'm a fan of all females communities. Like, I live with my mom and my sister, just the three of us half the time, and I'm a part of a sorority. So I was really excited to join some of the other all women Stanford groups. But there was, in some of these pre-professional all women's groups, kind of elements of competition and exclusivity. And so that was the other piece of founding this club. We are all about collaboration and learning together. We say we're going to be each other's cheerleaders and co-founders, and we lift each other up. And you might notice our acronym is SWITE. We pronounce it sweet and say we're all going to be C-suite execs one day.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
We do success stories too, if you are interested. I can share one or two.
Sure.
So we've been setting up networking opportunities with a number of VCs. And for example, one of our members just messaged me earlier this week that she's accepted a position in Accelerator with one of the VCs that she met through our club. So that's, for example, really exciting.
Wow. So exciting.
Having been in lots of conversations, VC conversations, PE conversations, it is an abundantly white male dominated space, like abundantly. And it's really, it actually surprised me. I mean, I was raised by my mom and my sister. My mom is, very much into equal rights and always has been. So I kind of was raised with that. When I noticed this, it was just pervasive. And I just love the fact, the Stanford kind of part of you just do it. And I have no doubt that group is going to, blossom. It's surprising me that it didn't already exist actually at Stanford. Sure. And so thank you for creating that. And I know for this and future generations of women who need that mentorship in space and platform to be able to really advance, the world's going to be a better place.
Thank you. And I have to say that I've received confirmation that what we're working for is super important through this internship, where unfortunately I have yet to hop on a call with a female founder. Like, it's really terrible. Of all the founders that I've met with over the summer for this internship, actually none have been women, and only a few female founded companies have been mentioned in our partner conversations. So this is a very real problem, and I'm glad to be a part solving it, not only with this club, but also in my internship. I'm like going to the phrase, to the edges of PitchBook and our network to find these female founders and draw them in and lift them up, because we just need to look out for each other.
I have no doubt you will. So Lily, it has been such a treat to spend some time with you. Honestly, I know I can speak for Scott. We've worked together for a long time. This conversation gives us hope. Truly, when we think about how this can go really well or how it could go really bad in the future, I think conversations like this with individuals that are smart, they're humble, they're eager and excited about using this technology for good, it gives us tremendous hope for what's possible in the future. And we see AI really being used to reduce inequity, not create it, but only if it's in the right hands. So I cannot thank you enough for all the things you're doing, of course, for your time here and being willing to spend some time with us. Definitely a treat. I want to ride your coattails and see how far you go. No doubt we're going to see amazing things, and we're just so grateful for you and the energy that you're bringing into the space.
Thank you. It's an absolute honor. I'm so glad, Nathan, that our paths have crossed and they'll stay intertwined going forward. That's for sure.
Excellent. Well, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you didn't, like screw off, because this is the best episode ever. I really, 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 truly mean that. I think it was just such a delight and a treat. So Lily, we will put your LinkedIn and any other links that you want us to provide in the show notes so people can track your progress and align with you in ways that make sense. And for your female founders out there, reach out to Lily and do something special. We will see you next week for another episode of the Fundraising AI podcast. Until then, use AI for good. Thanks, everyone.